Hi everyone, welcome back to another edition of videos, and today we're going to continue our exploration of the Schliemann Defense and look at the fifth most popular option in this particular line, which is in fact e takes an f5. Might surprise you as well. Surely the whole point of this opening was to gambit a pawn. Why doesn't white just take the pawn? Well, in actual fact, this line isn't particularly good for white. It's clear that by capturing here, he has given up his central majority of pawns. So now black has got a majority in the center with these two pawns. So in my opinion, it's quite easy for black to take over the center. And well, in actual fact, holding on to this pawn for white is in fact quite difficult. Black should be quite comfortable in reclaiming this pawn. At some point he'll be trying to move this d5 pawn forward and then recapturing with his bishop on f5. If white was to try and look for ways to try and hold on the pawn, maybe play moves like g4, unfortunately these sort of moves will be weakening white's king side, so it's not in his best interest to do something like this. With that said, this line has actually got the highest draw percentage in all of the variations that we're going to be looking at, and the reason for that is there is in fact a draw sequence that white can initiate if he so desires. And well, I guess in sort of, if you're thinking, you know, okay, as black I'm happy to take a draw, then maybe I'll show you this line and show that, you know, Black can at least get a draw if he wants to. But with that said, I think there is some adequate play that black can go to if he wants to play for a bit of activity, and in fact even play for a nice interesting gambit line that focuses on activity and in getting a fast attack against white. Unfortunately, in this particular video, there won't be a great illustrative game, as unfortunately, because the variation is so rare, there's only been one game in the position which did in fact end in a draw. In any case, black needs to be very precise here. So one of the key characteristics of this position is the fact that by taking here, white has vacated the e4 square. So black, in true taking over the center style, can play e4 here, and this now takes control of the center. It threatens d5 as well, and black can consolidate his advantage in the center by reclaiming the pawn on f5, thus equalizing the material. So white will need to play precisely as well here. Notice that this white knight has got no squares that it can go to. He ideally doesn't want to play a move like g1 as well. This just undevelops and allows black to get a really nice advantage in this position. So instead there are two lines, they both lead to the same variation, but queen takes on e2 or captures here on bishop captures on c6. They both lead to the same game. So after queen to e2, queen to e7 needs to be played. Obviously needs to hold on to this pawn on e5. You don't particularly want to play a move like d5 here as well. Knight to e5 will then be doubling onto the knight. In fact, it's very, very difficult for black to hold on to this knight now. After a move like queen to f6, in actual fact, this is a totally losing line, as not only does white have this particular threat, but also has a double threat over here with this queen. So, you know, we've got to be careful about our king's flank getting a bit too exposed, and this is just a clear example where this can go horribly wrong for black. So going back, queen to e7 must be played, defending the pawn. Now white will most likely opt for capturing here on c6 now. D takes on c6. The purpose of this is to get rid of the knight that was defending the d4 square, so white doesn't need to retreat with his knight to g1. So now our knight can come to d4, and here this is where this particular variation has, in fact, unfortunately, a bit of a I guess not a most satisfying conclusion for most players, as black, if he chooses to, can in fact play for a draw here. So after the move queen to e5, there's been 31 games out of the 36 games that have been played where white has just simply continued with the move knight to f3. And well, after queen comes back to e7, knight to d4, there is often this repetition, unfortunately. Now, as I say, for black, maybe this is not the end of the world if you ever have this particular variation happen. You might be happy to take a draw as black, but if you want something that's a little bit more ambitious, instead of this repetition, what you can do is play the move knight to f6. So now defending this pawn with two pieces now. Here in this particular variation, knight to c3 can be played, and here we can play the move queen to e5, as now we can actually safely capture this pawn on f5 now. If the knight comes back to f3, we can capture here. Now you might be asking for yourself, hold on a minute, couldn't we capture that f pawn to start with? Unfortunately, in actual fact, that is in fact a mistake, and it's a slight nuance in the position. So after, let's say, queen to e5, and we've got this potential draw sequence turning up, knight comes to f3. If we capture here, this is in fact a mistake, as the move d3 is adequate in being able to reclaim this pawn. In fact, it's very difficult for black to defend this now. After the move knight to f3, the knight can come to knight b to d2. Notice in the last variation, the knight could come to knight could come to c3, and unfortunately, this means black hasn't got this nifty pinning idea with the bishop now, which will allow him to defend this pawn and castle, thus allowing the pin to end. So if we play this now, c3 can be played, and well, unfortunately black is going to just lose a pawn in this particular variation. So going back then, back to this initial position, so going back a little bit further, so here after, instead of queen to e5, knight to f6, knight to c3, knight to e5, knight to f3 captures d3. We don't actually have to worry too much about this recapturing idea just yet, as now bishop to b4 pins this knight. So white will need to castle before he can ever think about recapturing this pawn. So as I say, there's only been one game that's continued from this particular position. Knight came to g5, so now attacking this pawn. So now white has got a lot of attackers attacking this pawn. Black castled, knight recaptured, there was a couple recaptures, and here there was one game that actually ended in a draw where black decided to capture this knight. As a slight improvement, I think queen to f7 is probably better in this position. The problem with the move bishop takes is, although white has black has now inflicted white with not only a double isolated pawn but also another isolated pawn, I think the problem for black is his activity, because he's given up the bishop pair. He doesn't necessarily have the activity of his pieces to really try and dominate the position. I'll show you now instead if he just moves his queen back to f7 and from here, let's say, castles, bishop to e6. I actually prefer this position a lot more. Black has retained his bishop pair, and as a result he's able to use the much more open position to his advantage here. Notice already what black is threatening just to come to the c4 square, so then attacking this queen. Notice as well that black can take over these central files with his rook, and not only that, because he's not given up this particular bishop here, he can perch his bishop onto c5, where it will be attacking the f2 pawn. I actually quite like black's position here. Despite the fact that he's down a pawn, he's clearly got quite a lot of initiative, and using the fact that he's got the bishop pair to launch an attack on the white king. So really that kind of concludes, unfortunately, this this particular variation. As I say, it's not, weirdly enough, you know, you would think that this would be the most exciting variation, but just because of the fact that white has got a potential draw continuation and black can go into the draw variation as well, it's as a result that this variation is quite heavily drawing, if that makes sense. But there is, as you saw there, a nice way that black can play for a very active position, and you know, play for a gambited pawn to attack white's position. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. In the next part, we're going to be focusing on the next key variation on move 4, and that is the move d3, so the known as the quiet variation. And yeah, certainly a real testing variation for the Schliemann. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you soon. Take care.